we're about to tackle one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask, one that sits right at the intersection of mind-bending physics and really deep philosophy. The question itself sounds simple, but trust me, the implications are absolutely staggering. Is reality conscious? For most of human history, we've just assumed the universe is, well, it's just out there. It's like this giant, objective machine, ticking away, and it couldn't care less whether we're looking at it or not. But what if that's just not right? What if consciousness, the very act of us observing, is somehow part of what makes reality real? Let's dive into the evidence that started to shake that old foundation to its core. So, about a century ago, the first major challenge to that old way of thinking showed up. And it didn't just poke a hole in our understanding of the universe, it created a massive crack in the very nature of reality itself. On one hand, you've got the universe that we all learned about in school, right? The classical Newtonian universe. It's predictable, it's mechanical, and it's totally separate from us. But on the other hand, we have the quantum universe. And this is where things get really, really weird. It's a world that's not built on certainties, but on probabilities. A world where things seem bizarrely interconnected. And maybe most important of all, it's a world that seems to respond to us, the observer. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. What are these clues from the quantum world that are forcing us to ask these enormous questions? Let's look at the evidence. So the first big clue is a concept called superposition, and it's a wild one. Before we actually measure a tiny quantum particle, it isn't in one single place. Instead, it exists as this cloud of possibilities, a field of potential. It's literally everywhere it could be, all at once. It's only when we look, when we observe it, that it snaps into one single definite state. The most famous example of this is the double-slit experiment. So get this. When we fire particles at a barrier with two slits in it and we don't watch them, they act like waves. They go through both slits at once and create a pattern on the other side, just like ripples in a pond. But, and this is the crazy part, the moment we set up a detector to see which slit they go through, their behavior completely changes. They suddenly act like tiny little bullets, creating two simple, distinct lines. The takeaway here is just incredible. The act of observing fundamentally changes the outcome. Now, while this is happening on a tiny quantum level, you've probably felt a version of this in your own life. Think about any big decision you've ever had to make, right before you commit to a job or a move or a relationship. Countless futures are all possible. They kind of exist in your mind as a superposition of potential. But the moment you act, the moment you make that choice, you collapse all of that potential into one single unfolding reality. All right, the next clue is maybe even stranger. It's called quantum entanglement. This is where two particles can become so deeply linked that they basically act like a single system, even if they're on opposite sides of the galaxy. If you measure the state of one particle, you instantly know the state of its partner, faster than the speed of light. This idea was so completely counterintuitive, so bizarre, that even the great Albert Einstein just couldn't get on board with it. He famously called it spooky action at a distance. He was convinced there had to be some hidden information, something we were missing. But nope, experiment after experiment has proven this spooky connection is very, very real. And this idea of deep interconnectedness, it really mirrors our own world too, doesn't it? Just think about how one single decision can ripple through an entire family, or how one person's mood can instantly shift the energy in a whole room. We really aren't these isolated little units. We are all parts of these deeply entangled systems, where the idea of true separation is, well, it's pretty much an illusion. So, all of these clues, superposition, the observer effect, entanglement, they're all pointing toward one central, unavoidable idea. The observer isn't some separate bystander watching the experiment. The observer is part of the system. The logic here is just kind of inescapable when you think about it. To know anything, you have to observe it. Any observation, even just bouncing a single photon off something to see it, is an interaction. And that interaction, by definition, changes the thing being measured. So, complete, detached objectivity, it's literally impossible. You are always, always part of the equation. And this, right here, this leads us to the absolute heart of the matter. If the physical act of measurement is what collapses all that potential into a single reality, and measurement requires an observer, what does that say about consciousness? The very thing that's doing the observing. Okay, so this is where we need to be clear that we're stepping from hard science into the realm of philosophy. Some thinkers have proposed ideas like biocentrism, which suggests that the universe doesn't just happen to contain consciousness, but that it actually comes into being through it. Now, it is so important to say this is not a proven scientific fact, it's a philosophical interpretation, an attempt to make sense of all this incredibly strange data. So let's just break it down and separate what we know from the huge questions this knowledge raises. We know for a fact that on a fundamental level, reality is probabilistic. We know that observation changes outcomes, and we know the observer is part of the system. Those scientific facts then force us to ask these massive questions. Could consciousness be fundamental? Is our feeling of being separate just an illusion? And does meaning emerge through us instead of just existing independently out there somewhere? So, what does all this mean for you and me, for our daily lives? If we live in a participatory universe, how can we start to live in a way that actually aligns with that? Well, we can think of this as a kind of quantum toolkit for living. First, we have to embrace uncertainty. If the universe itself is built on probability, then our anxiety about not knowing everything isn't a personal flaw. It's us fighting against the very nature of reality. Second, it means we should act in order to get clarity. Just like a quantum particle, our path forward often only becomes clear after we commit, after we participate. And finally, it's about allowing for possibility. Real creativity happens when we can hold multiple ideas in our heads, in superposition, without rushing to judge them and collapse them too early. And when you put it all together, it leads to this really powerful shift in how you see yourself. The universe isn't some pre-recorded movie that we're all just passively watching. It's much more like a live, improvisational play. And guess what? We are all on stage. We are active participants in this incredible unfolding process. So if we boil it all down, the key takeaways are these. Reality isn't fixed. It's a dance of probabilities. Our observation, our participation, matters, maybe more than we can even imagine. We are not separate from the system we're observing. Uncertainty isn't a bug. It's a feature of the universe. And meaning isn't something you go out and find. It's something that emerges through your engagement with the world. And that leaves us with this final, powerful thought. If this participatory model of the universe is even a little bit correct, it changes everything. The ultimate question is no longer the passive one of, what is all this? It becomes the active one. How will I choose to participate? What reality will I help bring into being? Science can't answer that question for us. It can only invite us, each of us, to ask it for ourselves.